the amounts that of requests that she has received for spending from various government institutions, what they were for, and how much of it she approved. We're taking a look at that in a bit more detail. The front page of the Standard newspaper, however, has a report on the finance bill as the public participation stage continues. And the top page says there, don't gamble with tax. Now, as it turns out, captains of industry are warning that the government that tinkering with the taxation regime will lead to businesses shutting down. Massive job losses, increase in the cost of living, or should I say further increase in the cost of living, and failure by the taxman to grow tax collections, which in sense then would negate the whole point of the collection of taxes. It's a report, again, we'll be taking a look at in a bit more detail, but we'd like to hear your thoughts on this as the public participation process continues, and the Finance Committee will be holding public hearings on the 10th of June at the KICC, and so many other members asking how they can get their views heard will have a chance to do so on that day. But let's take a look at the front page of the Daily Nation as well. And the top page there says, harsh reality of new varsity fees. Now, students and their families are now being forced to choose university courses that they can afford, as opposed to those they can qualify for and aspire to study for under the new funding model introduced last year. Meanwhile, first-year students who are the first to use this model have already accumulated huge fee balances, which are set to increase even further as they progress. So the story is on page 7 of the Daily Nation. But again, we'd like to hear your thoughts on this, especially if you have been directly affected or, I say, impacted or benefited from the new university funding model. Do let us know what your thoughts are. The hashtag is New Dawn. We'll be sampling your thoughts and comments in the course of this live broadcast. Now, in studio with us as we analyze what's making headlines on the dailies is former NAT Secretary General and former nominated Member of Parliament Wilson Sossion. Sossion, very good morning to you. And of course, as we take a look at what's making headlines on the dailies, let's take a look at page 7 of the People Dailies, front page. That's where the story continues. And so, Nyakangwa rejects 1 billion shillings State House Dias funding request. As it turns out, State House had requested for 1.1 billion to cater for the construction of a modern presidential dais. Of that, about 700 of it would have gone to the construction of the dais at State House Gardens, and 400 would have been used to purchase more motor vehicles. All right. A lot more that this report outlines, including a 1.5 billion shillings requested by the State Department for Tourism to give KICC a facelift. An interesting report there that you can take a look at. But let's go back to the front page of the People Daily. KANU suffers blow in tough battle for KICC. It's a story that continues on page 6 of the paper. And KANU had wanted the court to declare that the land on which KICC owns belongs to them, or declare them the beneficial owner of the land, arguing that it had been allocated the land and obtained a title deed for it 20 years, for 20 years. But the court revoked that title issued to KANU and in fact declared the Ministry of Tourism as the lawful owner of the land. And so, you know, essentially KANU loses its bid to reclaim the iconic KICC. So, Sossion, a very good morning to you. Let's get your thoughts on this report. You know, it's been a long bid for KANU to essentially reclaim KICC on page 6 of the paper. What do you make of this?
You know, this is common knowledge, and this matter was sorted out during the early years of Kibaki administration, and the repossession of KICC from political party to the government, and therefore essentially to the people of Kenya, was properly executed. And it is fruitless for the old party KANU to try and claim ownership of a facility that was constructed using public resources. It was not constructed using KANU party money or resources, and we all know it was constructed using the taxpayers' money. And the taxpayers are not necessarily members of any political party. Any political party are exclusive clubs. And therefore, reverting it to the Ministry of Tourism and Industry, and I'm happy, that is where I'm the CS at the moment, is a great benefit to the people of Kenya. This is going to be an iconic tourist attraction in the city. And of course, when we are talking about reorganizing Nairobi to be a tourist destination with good transport circuits, with good iconic historic sites, we are talking about hosting international conferences, and you've seen almost all the international conferences touching on presidents is conducted at KICC. How then does it revert to an individual political? No political party should try and annex public assets using state authority. This is part of state capture. And so if KANU is trying to insist on ownership, then it means KANU is trying to promote state capture that we are trying to get rid of, so that the country can be free, the resources that belong to the people can belong to the people of Kenya. So to me, I stand with the judgment of the High Court, of the Court of Appeal, that that has fully reverted the KICC to the public through the Ministry of Tourism. And I hope the Comptroller of Budget and Parliament will allocate money so that we can modernize KICC. It becomes one of the best iconic destinations, and we promote tourism in the city. The future service industry that requires zero cost investment, doesn't require much capital, is tourism, and that we should open up doors as a country. When the president waived visas so that Kenya is a free visa entry country by anybody in the world, then it means we are opening up frontiers to tourism, and we should see these results as quickly as possible. These are low-hanging fruits. So it is a big win today for the Ministry of Tourism and for tourism in Kenya and for the people of Kenya. And it is a loss for patrons of state capture who still linger up to date.
We have with us in studio Embakasi North Member of Parliament, Honorable James Gakuya. And perhaps just to move away from that and take a look at what's making headlines on the front page of the Standard newspaper. The top page there says, "Don't gamble with tax." And so captains of industry are saying and telling the government that the taxation regime that is currently being propagated will be a recipe for disaster. Businesses will shut down. There will be massive job losses, a further increase in the cost of living. And when you take a look at the front page, we have some of their views. One of them, a CEO of the American Chamber of Commerce, says the proposed rate of 2.5% on the motor vehicle tax, whilst borne in addition to the other taxes, fees and levies applicable on motor vehicles, proves extremely punitive. We have, one from EA Venture Capital Association, the CEO, saying introduction of VAT on financial services will make them more expensive as additional costs will be passed to consumers, and this may hamper growth. What do you make of this conversation? And considering we're in the middle of public participation, and these are the views of stakeholders in these industries, in these sectors, what do you make of their thoughts?
Thank you very much. Good morning, Kenyans, wherever you are. Coming to the matter to do with the tax regime, let me say that, in fact, the burden sometimes becomes too huge. And you realize that, in fact, any business that anybody puts in place, at the end of the day, want to earn some profits out of it. But sometimes you realize that the tax is too huge, even to over 50% of the cost of a production. So in this case, any single pressure on tax is being pushed to the consumer. And when it's pushed to the consumer, it means it will affect all the users of that product, and therefore making it impossible for some of the products to flourish in the market. That's how we are, those who does research in this particular area are overseeing. And the answer is true. There is many commodities that Kenyans will be unable to buy any longer. This is depending on the cost, because when the cost becomes too unbearable, then you are pushing the consumer out of it. And especially when you move to the bread. The bread, when you tax the bread to a point where the bread will find itself to 100 Kenya shillings, not it will be only 30% of Kenyans who can afford such a bread, because depending on our earnings, daily earnings. And therefore, what are you doing? You are pushing people out of that particular commodity, and therefore shutting most of those factories that does that particular production. And my take in this is that let us also be observant when we keep on pressuring taxes to the people. We must look for those other options that can be able to assist the country to at least have savings. And one is critically moving to the area of wastage. Wastage is very, very, very key, right. And most of our resources are ending up to the drain. And that is why we should seal those loopholes and make sure that we save what we are losing out of wastage, and therefore leave the room for consumers to flourish. So
what then is your stand as the representative for Embakasi North and the chair of the Trade Committee? What is your stand on the Finance Bill 2024?
One, it is important to observe that if the country tax regime is moving to the route it is taking, it will shut many factories in this country. And when this factory shuts, then what you are doing, you are just crossing jobs of our Kenyans, locally. And when you do that, what are you doing? You are putting people out of job. So it is important to observe that, in fact, any single player in manufacture, any single player in production does depend on that tax regime. And when the tax regime becomes so exorbitant, then you are shutting down these businesses. It is wise to relook on the matter and have a way to balance. Because failure to balance, then it means that we are going to lose more jobs than yesterday. And losing more jobs, it means we are losing more taxes. Right. So let us be observant on that and look in the matter, and also try to copy those other countries that have succeeded through taxation. Not many which have succeeded through that stiff taxation.
I'd like to get your thoughts, Sosion, on that, just drawing from that, because as Honorable Gakuya says, when we have job losses and industry players say this finance bill is a recipe for job losses, then the taxman might not see an increase in tax revenues. Massive job losses mean less people paying taxes, less people with spending power.
No, this debate is very healthy. As we debate the finance bill, the Treasury has made proposals of revenue collection measures, including where to tax, who to tax, and how to tax. And of course, I've been in the labor movement for a long time, and investors would like to make huge profits. Kenya is a beautiful destination because of one thing: high quality labor that is good for investors and investments, and is a good market also at the same time. I think also the manufacturers should also be able to give us viable options of raising revenue rather than warding off the taxman. What I know, having been in the trade union movement for a long time, we know of many manufacturers who are unscrupulous and making huge profits. And you see, when the taxman comes in, it means the profit margins will shrink a bit. And because of that, a bit shrinking, that is when we are seeing this reaction. We would like honest response from that end, that of the manufacturers. And the threat is job losses. Who is being targeted here? The worker, reducing the workforce or salary cuts and all that. I think we've got to be honest with all this, and that is why the finance bill itself goes through a process. They've made their submissions. Those submissions are being analyzed by the finance committee and all other stakeholders will have also made their submissions. I'm happy the chair, Trade and Investment, is here, Member of Parliament, my good friend.
Making his submissions, but remember, Sosyon, amid the conversation of how much this input, this public input in the public participation process will be factored in the final decision, the chair of the Finance Committee, Kuria Kimani, actually says it will be difficult to remove the 2.5% motor vehicle tax, despite various stakeholders coming in and saying,
no, the philosophy
reduce the percentage.
The philosophy of taxation and public submissions is not a referendum.
No, here's the thing. Many say perhaps even just reduce the percentage so we test the uptake.
That's
However,
negotiation.
The chair of the Finance Committee says it will be difficult to remove it because as long as the budget for the next financial year remains unchanged, that 58 billion shillings expected from the motor vehicle tax is crucial for financing the upcoming fiscal budget. It should be set in stone.
Now, let me state here, and Michelle, that public participation is not a referendum. You will not force amendments. You will convince, you'll try and convince the committee. You give justifications, whether written or oral. And upon receipt of the same, the committee will analyze all the submissions and it will take a decision whether to vary downwards or to maintain as is. And that is a prerogative of the committee to do so. And once it does that, it shall generate a report that it will table in the House. And of course, that report will go through the necessary processes. Any member of Parliament, for example, my brother here, can propose amendments, can move amendments, particularly third stage, and it is voted for. So really, out here we can canvass, we can talk, but ultimately the buck stops with the National Assembly to consider all those aspects, because one of the role of the members of Parliament is representation of the people of Kenya, and the people of Kenya exercise their power directly or indirectly through their representatives. So all these concerns shall be captured. But let me talk about the principle of taxation. If you look at the US, for example, one item that becomes a big agenda in the election is the taxation. And I think we are graduating to that level as Kenya, that we discuss now the taxation every so often within the finance bill or even outside the finance bill. That in the US, the social democrats and the Democrats and the bottom class and middle class will always argue that you tax the rich, tax the manufacturers more instead of taxing those at the bottom and then deliver services. And I think that is almost the philosophy that the Treasury is using. If you're extending taxation to, say, to motor vehicles, for example, then who owns the motor vehicles in the social stratification of our society? It is definitely not people at the bottom class. It is middle and upwards. So you extend that taxation to that category of citizens.
Many of these people are still living hand to mouth. I mean, when you take a look at
who are the manufacturers?
It says owners of vehicles whose value is below 4 million shillings will have to spend a larger proportion of their income on insurance as compared to those who own vehicles.
But generally, if you apply your minds to some bit of sociology and you look at the population pyramid, the people at the bottom are ordinarily the poor. They won't own vehicles, and they're the majority. And therefore, when you are extending taxation, make sure the taxation does not burden those at the bottom. And you can expand the taxation at the top. So when you extend it to the motor vehicles, it's definitely the ownership is those in the middle class and top class. This will be a burden.
Let's move on. Let's move away from that.
Of course, it's
going to
hurt.
Let's move away from the issue of taxation.
And by the way, Michelle, the Bible says, give Caesar what belongs to Caesar.
Right, and Caesar is to give the people what belongs to
Michelle, as we conclude,
if the taxation plan is properly structured from the Treasury, and it will go through a process of treatment by
All right.
It will become law.
Michelle, summing up on that, it also supposed to be considered that the same people who are pushed to the corner on fuel are the same people who want to move on and still charge more extra on the motor vehicles. The same motor vehicles are the motor vehicles that use fuel. Then the balance should be tax at one angle. But why do you tax every size? Then you downsize that person. At the end of the day, that vehicle, that person will use it a day for a month or a year. And this is putting those particular vehicles out of the road. What are you gaining? Because I'm sure most of the people will not be able to fit with these new taxes. And the math you do, you just use math.
And there's also concerns about more vehicle owners using third-party insurance or even evading insurance altogether.
And also what we are doing, you are still pushing the passenger to the corner because the burden will transfer to what we call fees of transport. And this will still push that hustler to the corner. I think we must balance this when we are making our proposals in such finance bill.
Right, and that's a ripple effect of what some of these taxes would mean, even if it were for the middle class and above. But let's take a look at us making headlines on the Daily Nation. The front page there says, harsh reality of new varsity fees. And the education sector continues to have a lot of concerns around the state of tertiary education, and the new funding model seems to have disenfranchised students and families who are now being forced to choose university courses that they can afford as opposed to those that they qualify for or those that they wish to study. And it's a story that continues on page 7 of the paper. So as it stands, HELB says it is facing a cash crunch in the 2024-2025 budget and has a financing deficit of about 11 billion shillings, making it only able to fund only continuing students and only 17% of the first-year students. And that leaves out about 101,000 students who sat for KCSE and are eligible for university education, but will or may not be able to receive this funding. So, Sion, you've been big on speaking about the Kenya Kwanza's vision for education. But when we talk about tertiary education, even the new varsity funding model seems to be a pain for students and parents. What do you make of this report?
Not just big, but I've been fully part of, and I was part of the drafting of the charter, and the funding model was contained in the charter, and you know, Michelle, our universities were collapsing. Nobody paid attention to what was happening. Universities were riddled in huge debts of up to 60 billion, and it was growing. Programs were collapsing. Research work was collapsing. Unpaid salaries for staff. Very sad story. And that is why we took time, and the president himself took personal responsibility to engage in conversation with university dons prior to his election. And that culminated in signing of the Charter of Education Charter on 23rd of June 2022. And the key take home in that charter is the funding of education is very critical. Funding of basic education, funding of TVETs, and funding of higher education. None can be dealt with in isolation. And the agreement was that all of them must be properly funded. And where funding was skewed and was not right, it must be corrected.
So why do we see this headline today?
And the funding model that was adopted for the universities was generated through a careful study, careful consultation, even with the vice chancellors. And last week, the president had a review meeting with the vice chancellors at State House. You all know it. And the spot check that I've checked across the universities is that the funding model, once it operates fully to the 4th year, because now it's getting to the 2nd year, it's affecting the current 2nd years and the new 1st years will be admitted this year. Once it gets to the 4th circle, then the universities will be breathing totally back to life.
What
the argument here,
to the students who are already disenfranchised now?
The argument here, if you look at the stratification of payments, first of all, the Higher Education Loans Board funding was stretched from the running 13 billion to 30 billion. And the total funding to universities was stretched from 54 billion to 84 billion. That is enhanced funding. And the manner of transmission of money to the universities is through the cost of courses and capitation per student. That you cost the cost of every course, and therefore any student applying for any course will have to look at that particular course, which university, where it is offered, and the cost, so that from admission you choose.
It says right here, Sosion, that students are being forced to choose courses that they can only afford.
No, it is not being forced.
Not courses that they qualify for.
It is not being forced.
What happens to the thousands of
students
you
qualify,
who've already
the course,
used the model but have accumulated
that is being
balances?
simplistic,
those are the issues, those are the issues you're not addressing.
That's being
those
simplistic.
Are the concerns
I'm getting to that.
I'm getting to that. We don't have much time,
Now, I'm getting to that. Now, the funding model will allow a student to enjoy a scholarship, both a scholarship and a loan. So even a poor student from a household with no income will still join medicine. Will still join medicine and will be able to fund, because the level of allocation from scholarship is escalated based on income.
Okay, we must take a break, Sosion.
Those from poor families will pay zero at the end of the day.
What about these first-year students who've already accumulated fee balances? What happens to them? What happens to the over 100,000 who may not get this funding?
You will need to disaggregate and see how much each student and why, and which student falls in which category. There are categories where students fall and the households will have to pay based on household income, because that analysis has been done. And that those students will be fully paid for by government, regardless of the choices of courses they make. So that the model is not general. The model will direct funding to the most needy students, almost at 100%, but those from households who can pay will pay.
You're not answering the question, Sosion. We must take a break. But the concern is these very students who are promised 100% funding have already accumulated fee balances, and these are likely to rise as they progress. We'll be talking about a bit about that when we come back. But let's take a break. That's what's making headlines on the dailies this morning. When we come back, we'll begin our conversation on that growing rift between President William Ruto and his deputy Rigathi Gachagua, the intrigues therein. And a look at the front page of the Star there says finance bill, new battle zone for Ruto and Rigathi. That's where we start from when we come back. Do stay with us.